Consent, an important aspect of privacy, which is basically saying that we'll process your information only on your permission. But is it mandatory for all personal data? Well, let's talk about that in this second myth where we say that consent is mandatory for all personal data. Welcome to my YouTube channel where you regularly see new content on data privacy. We have been talking about DPDP for the last couple of days. No, for much longer time. For the last couple of days, we have started talking about the myths around DPDP. And today we are discussing the myth that consent is mandatory for all kinds of personal data. The common myth is that DPDP means consent everywhere. Anything that you want to do has to have a consent. No consent is non-compliance. Every form needs a consent checkbox. More and more consents, more protection. Well, two aspects. A, consent is not required for everything, and we'll come to that. B, just having consent does not mean that you are compliant. You have to respect it also. So just getting a form filled, just getting some tick box does not mean that you are compliant. There's a lot more effort that you need to do to prove your compliance. Let's talk about it. People believe in this because many people still have that assumption that DPDP is nothing but is a sort of a 90% guidelines taken out of GDPR, which is absolutely incorrect. There are far more new things, better things that DPDP have. There are geographical differences. There's difference of behavior of people in and out of India, comparing Indians with Europeans. So there's nothing that says that for DPDP the it is a copy of GDPR. And if GDPR says consents everywhere, by the way, even GDPR does not say consent everywhere. Cookie banners are there. Cookie banners have been there for ages, even before privacy, right? There are fear of penalties. There are oversimplified legal advices which say take consent. You are safe. It's a good way to look at it. Yeah, take consent. Then you are for sure safe if you are honoring the consent and following your policies and notices, following all the privacy norms. Does not say that consent is mandatory and consent is the only way to get compliant. Safer to take consent thinking is definitely there, and if you can afford to, even I would say, what's the harm in taking a consent? It really depends on cases where you don't need it, and therefore there is no point wasting time on waiting for consents. What TPTP says is that consent is a lawful basis. It's one of the lawful bases of processing personal information. Consent is not the only lawful basis. DPTP allows non-consensual processing also. So you don't need consent for everything under DPTP. Certain purposes are explicitly permitted in DPTP. Obligation-based processing is allowed for those purposes, right? That means you have to meet some obligation and therefore you can go ahead without the consent. Employment, service delivery, context matter. Why talk of employment as well? Well, I have to transfer your salary. Now there are two ways to look at it again. One way is that should I come to take your consent that I have to transfer your salary? The other way to look at it is that when I issue you an appointment letter, I provide you with the complete salary breakup, and I do mention that I'll be transferring your salary in the bank account provided by you by say 7th of the month. Period. You can do that, right? And all other terms and conditions in someone signs. Now that's not the privacy way of taking consent, but for sure that informs that this is your salary, this is your date of transfer, this is the bank detail you have given. You can call it a consent, you can call it a notice. But because it's under contractual obligation that someone has delivered me service and I have to pay for it, I don't need a consent from him again. When is it not mandatory? Employee payroll. Statutory reporting, I have to inform the government that I have deducted your provident fund. I have to inform the government that I have deducted your income tax and I have to deposit them as well. Fraud prevention, security monitoring, video surveillance if required, not only for employees but on the road, for any of the investigations that are going on, any legal things, right? For any service delivery already registered by the user, requested by the users, then consent is not mandatory because someone asked for that service, right? For any legal matter, legal investigation, public interest matter, consent is not required. Employment is one aspect, this is the second aspect. The medical consent is the medical consent, which is treatment consent. Now, there a consent is required whether your personal information can be used for other purposes, and the purpose to be defined by whomsoever who takes the consent. Important. A critical medical research, your consent not required. Our neighbors knew that there is a issue with respect to COVID in the building. We knew who all in the building are infected. No one asked for a consent. Everyone had to inform. The moment you get your COVID positive test done from a lab will automatically give that information. That was because it was in public interest. So anything which is in public interest, under a litigation, under a contractual obligation like salaries, consent is not required. Over consent is not required, right? Invalid forced consent comes up if you are using consent improperly. There could be a consent fatigue because of too many consents. I agree should not be clicked. Broken accountability. I have a full course on Udemy on consent management, by the way, so you can get into those details if you want to. Accountability would get broken if consent is not proper, and then, of course, that defines that your governance is weak. As a key takeaway, consent is important, but it's not universal for everything. But you should document why did you think you don't need the consent, under which category of those lawful basis. Emergencies, public welfare, medical research, contractual obligations. DPDP supports purpose-based processing. Rights basis matters more than just clicking a checkbox. There's an emergency surveillance required. You can't go to people to ask for consent. By the time surveillance purpose would be lost. Poor consent design is a compliance risk. What should be a good consent design? Again, log on to the Udemy course. That's about consent and the myth that consent is required everywhere under DPDP. I hope it made some value to you. As I mentioned, I have a full course on consent, so you can go on to Udemy and log into one of those. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and share your feedback in the comment section. Thank you.